The following is a production of Mosaic in Whittier, California, a community of faith, hope, and love.
I'm really excited to get a chance to continue this with you and relive some of the stories that have shaped the way I think about the scriptures. And I'm hoping that as we go through this, you get an idea of how to look at the scriptures in a way that's perhaps more human and less like an academic. And if you are an academic or you study theology, you're all into that, that's awesome. But remember that in the end, it's that we're trying to understand the person of Jesus. In fact, I'm going to tell you that ultimately in the end, what you really want to experience is what Paul prayed for his church, that you would experience the length and the breadth and the height and the width of Christ's love for you. That, I find, is what's transformative. You can have a tremendous amount of information about the Bible. You can be that nerdy guy that stays in the library during lunch breaks at high school, like I did. Or you can be that guy that gets super excited whenever you hear da-da-da-da-da. How many know what that is? National Geographic, right? I see anything a yellow square. I'm that guy. I love that. I love reading the obscure, the arcane, and the esoteric, and essentially the useless facts of the world. But what's been helpful is to read some of those things that are background regarding the scriptures and seeing some of the connections why our Bible and our faith is embedded in Middle Eastern history. You have to remember that. It's embedded in the Middle East at a specific time. And so when you understand more about the geography or the culture of the time, the scriptures come alive in a different way because, especially being in the West, we have a very unique way of making it fit for our culture and our time. And I don't think you get too goofy, but it's easy to misunderstand some of the stories, and it's easy to miss very significant small details that are placed there for a reason. But let me start with the first slide. Let's get Chuck up there again. Oh, wrong one. The picture of, there he is. He's back. So once again, not a photograph of Moses, but a representation of Charlton Heston as Moses. And last week we talked about Exodus. Today I'll be speaking from a story of Exodus and Deuteronomy, but it is found primarily in the book of Exodus. And by the way, just to give you a quick rundown, and you'll hear me repeat some of these things over and over again, and they'll stick more and more as by repetition. Genesis is a book of firsts. The first time anything happens usually happens in Genesis. The first mention of music, the first mention of a craftsman or an artist, the first mention of the law, the first mention of God speaking to humanity, the first mention of humanity speaking back to God, the first the act of creation, the act of decreation, the order, the chaos. Everything is a first there, and it begins to color and set the tone for the rest of the book. Like, for example, what did Adam do when he heard God coming in the garden after the fruit? He hid, right? And did God probably know what happened? Of course. And so what's a metaphor, what's the principle you can take from there, from the rest of Scripture, is that God will always seek humanity. God will always seek men or women, always. And when, as the Scripture says, that when Adam heard the sounds of God, he went to hide, I think for many, many, many people, and you might be one of them if you're sitting here today, that when you sensed there was an immaterial world, and when you sensed that there was a God that actually was, quote, after you, who was seeking you, there's a part of you that wanted to run from that. And so that sets the tone for the rest of the book and the rest of humanity. So Genesis is a good book for that. Exodus, the story of if you're taking notes, here it comes, the Exodus. It's the story of God's people leaving Egypt, which we'll talk about again. There's a great film regarding that, a little dramatic, a little over the top now. But if you don't like that, you can always listen to Val Kilmer and Sandra Bullock and The Prince of Egypt, the cartoon version. And then if you want to know about the priesthood and how priests were supposed to do what they did, there's the book of Leviticus. If you had trouble sleeping, you can read the book of Numbers. Don't read it when you're operating heavy machinery. And then the Deuteronomy book, the Deuteronomy. Boy, that's a Hispanic way of saying it, wasn't it? The Facebook, the McDonald's. The book of Deuteronomy. All this education just blown right now. The book of Deuteronomy is a retelling of Exodus. And so it's a retelling of the law, a retelling of the story of leading. And as you recall from last week, I pointed out a couple of things, and that is God almost normally introduces himself to the nation of Israel as the God that sets you free. And it's never the tone of, therefore you owe me. It's always a tone of, I love you. What I'm about to say is going to be harsh, but understand that I love you. I'm the God that sets you free. All right? Let's go to the next picture for just a moment. By the time Moses is a player, Moses player. By the time Moses is a character or on the scene in Egypt, this is over 1,000 years old. That's what's fascinating. This is 2600 BC. This is an ancient, amazing, fascinating culture. How many of you ever seen, I'll even watch this. That's how lonely I am for information. Have you ever seen Aliens and the Pyramids? Still need to laugh back there. You've seen it, and the reason is that the more you study the pyramids in Egypt, is that it just seems to spring up out of nowhere. There's no gradual, growth to their amazing culture and the mathematics and the art and the literature and language and architecture and how they crack this code. In fact, if you study the pyramids, I don't know why you would, but I did, but for a short time, that the tunnels that are in there make no sense, and there's no light source, but there's no evidence of any kind of light, like torches or flames, or nothing. And others have demonstrated that the large pyramid here acts like a battery in some ways. It even has components that when it heats up, it expands. It has a built-in self-contained air conditioning quality to it. Weird, right? And I recall this one Egyptologist told me, he said, don't spend a lot of time doing this because you'll get lost and you'll waste a lot of years of your life studying this. And so I said to Dr. Corey, I said, thank you for the help, I appreciate that. And he said, ain't no thing but a chicken wing. That's what he told me. So, strange, I didn't know the brother had sold. He's the president of the Bible, so many of you don't know who that is. This is the small little man. Zacchaeus, actually. So, the interesting thing about this is that this is always the story of God as the backdrop of this culture, this time. And when I talk about the story of God and the story that we find ourselves in the story of God, for us here, now that we've been affected by the West, we think and learn truth as the Greeks do, by ideas, concepts, clear definitions of words. What do you mean by that? And defining those things out. Okay, that's how we learn, by concepts, ideas. But for our friends in the Middle East, they learn by pictures, metaphors, and more important, the meaning of places is powerful. So, for example, we might say in the West, God is omniscient, omnipotent. We'll speak of theophanies, we'll speak of different types of theologies when we don't know what we're doing because we don't know how to explain certain things, and so we give them names. But our Middle Eastern friends would talk about God is my shepherd, or God is living water, or God is a rock. And by the way, when it's always a rock, it's not something you hold in your hand. It would be like a mountain or a hill that would say, God is like a rock, and speak of his stability or his immutability. So, there's different ways that people understand truth and understanding, and the book that we read, the Bible, is embedded in Middle Eastern thought and culture. So when you read about God being a shepherd, you can get lost in trying to figure out, the theology of a shepherd, or you can just ask the shepherd how he takes care of animals, and you get an idea of how God cares for you. All right? Okay. Let me jump now to the scripture in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy 8, verses 2 through 4. Here's what it says. Remember. By the way, that is, if you're underlining or making notes, that would be probably the key word to make a note of. That in the scripture, if you were to pull up like a Bible software or a concordance and look up the word remember, you'd find it hundreds of times. Because if there's a problem that we have as people, that we just forget what God has done. So he says this, remember, and this is Moses speaking, retelling the story of Exodus, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years. Why? To humble you, to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. So he humbled you. He caused you to be hungry. Actually, that is more starving. Then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Hey, by the way, you know the story of Jesus in the wilderness, the desert? And he has those powerful encounters with this evil personage, what we call Satan or the devil. And he quotes the scriptures 3 times. Each time, look at Deuteronomy. Your clothes, verse 4, didn't wear out, and your feet didn't swell during those 40 years. Please leave that up for just a moment. The first word I told you is important, because it's just a key that goes up throughout the scripture. Just remember. How many of us would just be better off and wouldn't panic so much if we just remembered all the things that God has already done for us? But it's this next part that I want you to feel how surprising and shocking that was to understand that God led you all the way in the wilderness, because that word led isn't like, hey, come on guys, follow me. That wasn't it. It was like trying to get your kids out of the market. If you guys are trying, you have to, you don't tell them to come follow you. You have to go behind them and push them out. Yes? Okay, I just want to know if I was the only one that we had kids that were out of control. We would have those little dog shock collars on them. No. Yes, we did. Put them around their ankles. Kids dance well. So, it's terrible, I know. But it worked. To humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart. Now, you read this and you're thinking, look, God already knows that. Yes, of course he knows that. But for us as being tested, we think of being tested as, what's the purpose of testing you? What's the purpose of an exam or a test? To see what you know. Right?
Or see what you don't know.
Or see what you don't know. Now, this, in Middle Eastern thinking, was to see what you learned. It's a slight nuance, because you really don't know something until it's yours and you can actually use it. How many of you know what this is like? I've done this. I'm going to do this semester. When you have an exam, I recall, man, one of my exams, it was a philosophy exam. It was 20 questions. They were all essays. 20 essays. It was, no, they were all 20. Went through my mind. 20 questions you had to write out. I'm going to say essay, and there's everything on these toilets. So there was these 20 questions, and at random, through the throw of the dice, the professor would pick 3, and you'd have to, respond. And it was like 60% of your grade for the year. And so the study guide was 17 pages long. That's just the study guide for you. So at that point, you're just memorizing. You're not really, if you understand it, that's awesome, but you're just memorizing it. You have no idea what you're writing. You're putting, oh yes, you're writing. You don't even know what you're writing anymore. I just gave my information, my address, my social security number. But the idea here was to see what you learned. It would be similar to putting somebody in a stress condition to see how well and how much they've accomplished, then to find out what is left to do. It'd be like when you take a test at the hospital. Let's see what's wrong. Let's see what's right. What did you learn? That's the idea there. And of course, that verse 3 is one of the words that Jesus quoted. And what's interesting is that the slight nuance in verse 3 is also the fact that God wanted these people to depend on him, not depend on food or depend on other things that were necessary. It's not that he doesn't know that we need that, but he wanted us to get in our heads that you don't need what you think you need. You need, as you've heard me say lately, a word from the Lord. And in verse 4, even though you didn't do well in any of this, you failed every of the 3 tests I gave you, you failed all 3 of them. Verse 4. water, food, shade during the day, fire at night. I still took care of you, even when you were defiant and when you were nasty about it. And I'm going to tell you about that later. I still took care of you in the desert. So is a desert good or is it bad? Is it a wasteland, like Deuteronomy says, where the nation fails on a regular basis over and over again? Or is it a good thing, like Jeremiah says? Let's go to Jeremiah, that verse here. Jeremiah 2 says this, God's message came to me, and it went like this. Get out into the streets and call to Jerusalem. God's message. I remember your youthful loyalty, our love as newlyweds. Gosh, when was that? That sounds awesome. When was that? When you stayed with me in the wilderness? What the? That wasn't good. You stuck with me through all the hard places. Well, they kind of had to, didn't they? And Israel was God's holy choice of pick of the crop. And anyone who laid a hand on her would so wish that he had. This is God's decree. So, we experience our desert, dry moments in our lives as failures and challenges and problems. God says that was the best time of our lives. I'll tell you. Some of you know our story, my wife and I, right? Yes? Not always the best. There were some mistakes I made, and, things happened. And yet, there were also times when we whether we were fighting for each other or for the relationship, it was hard. How many of you, if you've been married more than 5 years, no, it takes a year, doesn't it? Andy and Stephanie, it's coming, but just hang in there. It's all good, but there'll be some days you just as soon choke each other and as look at each other. And Andy, if you wake up some mornings without a knife in your chest, thank God. Just be grateful knowing that your wife didn't murder you in your sleep. With that blade, just every heartbeat as the life just lands out of you. Sometimes the most difficult challenges in a relationship are the ones that are the bonding, because you rely on each other in a way that's different than when things are just kind of going well. I think the relationships are mostly in trouble when you guys don't really, what's the word? You're almost kind of bored of each other. In fact, you're not even arguing. You don't even care to argue with the person. That's when it's really in trouble. I mean that. I mean, when you're fighting, hey, at least there's some life left in the relationship. Going to blows, left or right. And I know my wife's combo. First, it's a right. Then it'll be a left. And then I need to turn sideways because she's got legs. She's little, but she's got a right that's just a jab. Can you see Lilia putting on gloves going out? Yes. Take the girl underneath the leg, but you cannot take. See, what happened during that time is that Israel had to depend on God in a way that they didn't before. And God missed it. God missed the interaction. God missed the dependence. God missed the devotion. God missed the connection, the conversations, the time of sharing. That was different. So God had to be like, man, this was amazing. This was the honeymoon. And Israel would look at their history and like, man, we blew it. We were stupid. Now, here's what I want to draw to. Can we go to the next images? There's 3 of them. Let's see if that's the one I want. Yes. Okay. When you think of Egypt, does this come to mind? Do you think of something just hot and dry? Yep. No. You would be wrong. See, the wilderness is on either side of the Nile. Egypt has been referred to as the gift of the Nile because it's amazingly lush. Some of the best farmland in the world, the most productive land in the world. That's Egypt. That's where those folks were slaves in, that land. Go to the next image. Look at the contrast. It's huge. So you can feel, I'm going to go off screen, I'll be back. You can feel the, how much cooler this would feel walking versus walking on this. Am I right? Am I right? Of course I am. How many of you you're walking or you're driving down the golf course or cemetery, and it's kind of a warm day, and as you pass by the lawns of a golf course or a cemetery, the air cools immediately? Yes?
Yes.
Right? That's a specific phenomenon that occurs because of grass and green and trees. And water. Look at go to the next slide. Look what water does. Isn't that shocking? You know what's shocking to me though? I don't get this part. Why is it not even? Why is there just a big, and then they didn't do nothing over there, and then there's a big, but nothing over here? I don't know, just questions. I'm going to call the president. No, I won't. Yeah, that's the Nile, and that's where they came out of. And as lush as that was, you recall if you read the story, they were pining for their old life. Oh, we miss the leeks, we miss the onions, we miss the food, we miss the water. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, how ungrateful. They were slaves. And then, well, yeah, but now they're in the desert with no food, no water. But this is what's really weird about it. God drove them, like pushed them out into the desert. What's interesting to keep in mind is that well, if you could say it's easier or harder for God, but it was actually easier, I'm going to explain why, for God to take his Hebrews out of Egypt than it was to take Egypt out of the Hebrews. This was 400 years this nation had been in that culture. 400 years. And so even if grandma and granddad had great-great-grand, if they had an idea of God by the time, let's see here, that's maybe 10 generations later, they had no idea who that God was. Zero. Think, some of you come from other countries. Well, yeah, all of us did, I guess, right? We're all immigrants at one point, right? Think back how your family line, go back 10 generations. Where was your family? Scotland, some of you? Ireland? Mexico, some of you? Most of us? Take it back to country? One kid at a time? By attrition? Some of your family was in Scandinavia, right? Russia? Armenia? Some of you moved to Lower Armenia? Glendale? Someone told me that joke. I was not mine, but it is funny. Japan? China? Do you think you have anything like the worldview that your 10 generations ago parents did? The same religious beliefs? Beliefs about how the world works? What's right? Relationships? Jobs? Money? Anything? So when God finally gets to that generation, it's not like, oh my gosh, we're totally down into God. They had no idea who he was. You have to quit thinking that somehow they understood and then they were just, they're just being, ungrateful and weird and odd. No, they had no idea who he was. And also, the 10 specific plagues or disasters that God brought on Egypt, frogs, lice, the Nile, each one of them was one of their specific gods in Egypt. So God is blasting that home. I'm the God of the universe. 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 He's not just speaking to the Egyptians. Who else is he speaking to? The Hebrews, because they grew up in that culture. All they heard about is, one day God's going to be this. And now you understand that it's not really a compliment to say the God of the desert if you live in a country like this. The God of the desert. Your desert God. What's a desert God? A desert God means death and there's no life out in the desert. So, is the desert a good experience or a bad experience? Should you pray to be tested? Should you pray to avoid testing? I think if you're wise, you're not going to pray for either one of those things. You're just going to pray to become and learn to be obedient, because that's the purpose of the test, is to learn to be obedient, to trust. The one benefit about being the age that I'm at, and I think Bob and a few others in our age group would say to you, is that we had a chance to see God the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Even when we were inconsistent, God was faithful. Even when we were shallow and petty, God was lavishing mercy and grace and kindness. Even when things were you were dark and foul and vulgar, He was pure and kind and light. So that He's always consistent, and that's the benefit about being at our age. You just don't get as rattled as much as you used to because I remember this. This is kind of like that one. Some of you have actually said over a relationship, a loss of a job, a loss of an opportunity, oh my gosh, I feel like I want to die, and you're almost destroyed by it, and you think life is never going to go on, life is never going to be good again. It will be. You are going to laugh again. You are going to smile again. You are going to embrace life again. But it will be because of God, not because your circumstances change. And that's what God had to drive out of those Hebrews. It's not the circumstances. It's me. You cannot be dialed into this thing. You cannot be dialed into food. It can't matter to you more than me. And once it does, you've lost. But that seems a little stupid, doesn't it? I mean, if you're single, what do you want? Well, I shouldn't say you're single. But if you're single, some singles seem like they want nothing more than to be married. Is that fair to say? Don't shake your head if you're single. Doesn't give away like then you're weird. Then you're weird and clingy and needy. And sometimes if you're married, you want nothing more. I'm telling you, if whatever state you find yourself in, unemployed, overemployed, busy, lazy, tired, in relationship and in non-relationship, if you would just commit yourself to the love of God and pursuing God, the things that really matter are going to fall into place. And believe it or not, even your taste and your value that you put on things changes. But here's the weird part. We don't want it to change. That's the problem. And that was the problem with the Hebrews. They wanted their old life. Look, how many of you have done this? Actually, what is the next slide? I think I make the point here visually. What's the next picture one? Ah, beautiful. Good. This worked out well. So they leave Egypt. Look at the crowd. That's the crowd. Right? So excited. They're leaving Egypt. All the inappropriate gesticulation that went on. They're loaded with money. So what? They're in the desert. They can't spend it on anything. They can't eat it. But they're leaving Egypt. 2 days into it. They're dying. They were literally running out of water and out of food. And Moses, poor guy, had to deal with 1 million plus angry people, thirsty, hot. Maybe a handful was really dialed into God, but the rest, now what? And then it says that God led them to a place called Mara. Actually, they named it Mara. One well, 1 million plus people. About to get cray-cray up in here. Now that's in the Sudan. Someone really enjoyed that joke. It's yours. But this is what a well might have looked like in the Middle East in the desert. It's just on the ground, it's just on the ground, and perhaps maybe a little stone wall around it. Oh, here's the best part. Okay, it's going to take 2 or 3 days to get water to everybody. Guess what? The water is bad. It's bitter. And here's the best part. God led them there. They were pissed. They were mad. What does Mara mean? Some of you know this.
Bitter.
Bitter. The root from Mara is defiant, disobedient, discontented. They were bitter, all right. They were like, oh man. It's not referring to the water. It's referring to the people. Wouldn't you be a little put off? In the desert. My wife and I, we were driving home from Riverside last night. Escaping is what I really want to say. We were driving home from Riverside, and I needed to go to the restroom because I'm 12. And I was kind of, it was just kind of like mildly, I missed an exit that said McDonald's, because that's what McDonald's is good for. I just go to the restroom. But anyway, okay, well, the next one I gotta stop, and I'm thinking, wow, this is just 2 minutes. I'm in a car, I'm blasting down the freeway with air conditioning, listening to music that I like, talking to my wife, and I'm a little put off that I missed the next, so I gotta go 3 more minutes before I get to go to the bathroom. Imagine 2 or 3 days with no water and it's hot. Now somewhere, someone could have said, you know what, guys, come on, stop. We've just seen God do some amazing stuff. By the way, this is just 2 or 3 days since the Red Sea. Surely if God led us here, there's got to be a reason. Let's just go another mile. I mean, the cloud's moving. Let's follow the cloud for the next mile. Because, God knows what we need. And we don't live by water alone. We live by the word of the Lord. So let's go see what he has to say. That didn't happen. They decided to get ticked off. Now, let me ask you. God seems to set you free from something. Some of you guys, let's just use alcohol for example. Some of you women, you got off booze, you're sobering up, and then you realize how crappy your life now is. Because now you see it sober. And you realize you're unemployed or things are or underemployed and things are bad. So you go, okay, well, I'm going to pray God helps me with this job thing. And so you're praying. And you see what happens? The company goes through a layoff. And cuts it back, and you're laid off. And now you're thinking, why did God do this? How did God leave me out? Do you follow? Does this scenario fit anybody? Yes. You know that God was bringing you out of something, and then it got worse. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. What did my wife say yes? Honey, what was wrong with it? Oh yeah, it got worse. And so people began complaining to Moses because he was in charge. It's just like what happens here. I would say there isn't a week that goes by that someone would send me an email about what I should be doing different. Thank you. Appreciate it. If you did this. If you did that. I've actually had people tell me how to wear my pants. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. Don't wear those skinny jeans for crying out loud. You're almost 60. So I said, look, Lilia, here's the thing. So stupid. And by the way, I know it's part of it goes with the job. I get that. It goes with the job. So it all rolls up. Where's Tim? Right, Tim? It rolls up. If there's a leak in the bathroom at that Target, Tim hears about it. So what does Moses do? It rolls up. So Moses goes crying to God. Why did you do this to me? You're embarrassing me. Why did you do this to this people? Remember the people were saying, did they just lead us out here to die? They didn't know who God was. They had no idea, but they had to learn. Let's go to Exodus 15, 24 to 26. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, well, what are we to drink? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. Weird, right? The Lord issued a ruling and an instruction and put them to the test. Okay, now, by the way, going off screen again, we'll be back. We have no idea what this ruling was. But you know what I bet it was? About letting people who were weak or maybe mobility challenged, let them go first. Like, don't trample over them. I just trying to figure the scene. At any rate, something happened there. And then verse 26, it said, but from now on, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God, and do what's right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and you keep all his decrees or words, I'm not going to bring any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians on you, for I'm the Lord who what? Heals you. So he gives them this amazing promise. Okay, you guys get this. Have you ever had a teenage son or daughter or younger get upset because they didn't like the food that you're serving that night? Yes? Yes, of course, right? How come we're eating this when we're not at McDonald's? You know, right? And they had it coming. I'm not saying you should resort to violence, but in the Mexican household, it's the first option. There's nothing worse than serving somebody who is ungrateful and complaining about what you're giving them. That's the worst. Like, ugh. How many servers? No, feel me. Right. Once again, I'll say this for the millionth time. If you go to a restaurant, if you pray, if the food is crappy as hell, tip 20%. Just do that. You don't want people to think that God is cheap. The worst day of the week to work at a restaurant? Sundays. We have a lousy reputation. It's not because people hate Christians, they just hate you. And this jacket. I've been told, never come into a restaurant with this jacket. Okay. Let's go to the next slide for just a moment. Not the verse, the picture. See, Moses had a staff. That staff was awesome, wasn't it? I'm going to get into a snake. I'll touch water, it turns into blood. And maybe not literally blood. Could have been just everything died in it and it stank. But the Nile was one of their gods, and so were the animals in it. I touch the Red Sea. It opens up. I touch it again. It closes up. That staff rocks. But Moses, it's not the staff. I can do whatever I want with just a stick. Here's a piece of wood, Moses. That water that's so bitter you're all bent out of shape over. You want to trust me? You think I don't care? You think I don't love you? You think I don't see? Take a stick. That one's fine. Throw it in. Boom, water's fine. I hear people, they're well-meaning, so this is not just to trash the dead or something. They're so locked into their identity of their gift, of their talent. I gotta use my thing. I gotta be my thing. I gotta do my thing. And if they don't feel like they have an opportunity to do their thing here, they leave here. That's fine. And I wish them well, I mean that. But understand, you're just a stick. That talent, that amazing thing that you do is just a stick. Can you draw well? Do you paint? It's just a stick. Are you an amazing mechanic? You know how to fix things? You love doing that? Just a stick. You know how to cook and you know how to manage a household well? Just a stick. You know how to get up here and make a fool of yourself and tell stories? Just a stick. Just a stick. But in the hands of God, it can be used to bring order and shalom back to the universe. And then there's a dog, because I wanted someone to say that was cute. Thank you. You were just a slobbery stick at that point. Look at that brainless animal, nothing going on behind those eyes. That dog looks like someone's pet that I know. All right. Don't say that. All right, go to the next page. What's the last image I have? Do I have one? Ah, yes. Okay, now, go to the verse. I want verse 27. Sorry. I know I'm jumping you around. So here's what happened. So God makes that well, and here's what I think. They didn't get a chance to drink from it. So God either said, let's keep going or something, because verse 27 of that story, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs, 70 palm trees, and they camped near the water. You guys are just whining about this stupid well. You even said you wanted to go back to the thing that that you wanted to go back to the place I just set you free from. Because you didn't have water. You didn't have the thing that you wanted. You didn't have the thing you thought that you were convinced gave you life. You wanted the thing more than me. You wanted the gift more than the gift giver. And God is, see how He has to sometimes take Egypt out of you for a while? I get this. I've done this. I still do it to at some level. I know that I say that I want God, but sometimes I just want what God does for me. And I don't want Him. Yes? So go to the next slide. There you go. That. Can you imagine what that was like? 12 pools, 70 palm trees, 1 million people. Now we can all get water at a faster rate. It's sweet water, it's good water, there's shade, you can camp out. It's an oasis. Just one verse. Some of you, I'm pleading with you as your pastor, some of you are going to give up something amazing to scratch an itch that you have right now. Don't do it. Don't do it. Wait. What if God told you, in 1 month I'm going to bring this thing to July? Could you wait a month? Of course. What if he said it was a year? Could you wait a year? How about 10 years? I'm going to do the thing I know that you really want. You're going to love it. I know you really want this. In fact, I made you for this. Part of the reason why you want this is because I wired you for it. But can you wait 10 years? See, the thing is, we just don't know. That's the only problem. And for us, then we just don't want to wait. So we take it into our own hands, and we medicate ourselves, we anesthetize ourselves, or we fill in the thing that we think we need. Now, I want to read to you, as we close, Deuteronomy 8 one more time. And now hear it. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble you, test you, in order that you would know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. So he humbled you. He caused you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which you or your ancestors had known, to teach you that you will not live on bread alone, on money alone, on sex alone, on relationships alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of your Lord. And your clothes won't wear out, and your feet won't swell during those 40 years. So I have a quick thing to share with you, and we're going to close. I'm going to give everybody an object lesson today. You're going to get the water that you need to drink from God. And remember that all your talents and all the needy things you do, they're just sticks unless God works with them. So you're all going to get a little bottle of water and a stick. Come on, everybody. Go ahead and put in that background. Here, yeah. This is what you're all getting today. A stick and a water to remember. And God will give you the water to drink, and your gifts are just a stick. Could you put a little awesome? Now, while this is going around, ask yourself, what is that? What is your stick? What is that thing that you think, I'm really good at doing this, or I'd like to have this gift used, I want to be able to use this talent, I need this thing, I need a relationship, I want a job. Even if you get what it is that you want, it's still just a stick. If you're not connected to God, it's worthless. But a stick connected to God can do amazing things. Are you going through a desert, going through a tough time? Wonder if God is ever going to make it good again? If God loves you, cares for you, knows what you need. He's doing some serious work, apparently, trying to get something else out of you first.
Thank you for listening to this production of Mosaic Whittier. For more information on getting connected with Mosaic Whittier community, please visit mosaicwhittier.com.